There is a lot of talk in the writing community about the differences or preferences between writing stories with plot first development and character first development. And I want to be clear from the very beginning here. There is no right or wrong way to write stories, for anything, for comics, for screenplays, for short stories or novels, I always like to tell people, do what works for you. And that's the important part. So today I want to talk about what works for me specifically. And I feel like it may be a little bit misleading to call this character first story development because, the plot actually, it organically develops around the goals, the fears, the flaws of your protagonist. And the plot is driven by your characters. So, even though I focus on the characters first, I honestly believe the plot is just as important as the character development. If you don't have a good premise, then, you probably have a dud of a book, So I've tried a lot of different approaches to writing stories, and in my 20s I made a ton of mistakes, and I wrote a lot of crappy stories until I just dived into every bit of writing instruction that I could get my hands on. I really love Ray Bradbury's book, Zen and the Art of Writing. In fact, I recently rebought it. Old tattered copy here in my hands. It's falling apart. It's great. I love reading books like that where I have to be careful. you know that they've been used and worn. So Stephen King's book on writing is really good. My very favorite writing book is Story by Robert McKee, and it's really about screenplays, but it's about any kind of fiction. Because when it comes down to it, fiction has a very similar format, no matter whether you're writing a comic book script, a Hollywood script, a novel, So from there, after I just delved into all these writing books, I relentlessly practiced. And then I read more books, and then I practiced some more. And I feel like I've kind of got a good system down, for efficiency specifically. And so I want to share that with you here. Just the basics, and, in later videos, I'm going to go on even further. But this outlining method, it really focuses on one main character, even the epic story format, and I would say Lord of the Rings, it still follows the story of one main character overall, and of course that's Frodo. But I don't do a ton of world building and epic stuff like that. It's pretty complex, and I write more of a way that zeroes in on one character, but doesn't really have those billions of other storylines going on at the same time. I would say that my writing is similar to Star Wars, to be honest with you. Very, very cut and dry and formulaic, but again, kind of something that other people have talked about. You have to hide that formula and not make it apparent that these things are happening. It all has to happen organically, and the way to do that is kind of this method. These 4 pillars is what I consider these to be. Generally, the first thing, I always have an idea for a plot first, and kind of what I want to happen, but then I ask, what is the mission of my main character? So that's the first thing. Having a mission, what quest are they on, what goal do they want to accomplish? And for Frodo, it was destroy the ring. That was the overall goal. Or just in that very first book, it was simply to bring the ring to the elves. It all centered around a thing, an object, and that was a chore in itself. I mean, it took the whole first book to accomplish it. So your character, they need to have that mission, the definitive goal. And generally speaking, in a triumphant, heroic tale, you want them to achieve that goal, So, next thing, and this may sound a little cliche, but the very best question to ask yourself in pretty much every situation, no matter what, is ask why. That will save you so much headache as you go through your stories. You won't have to go back and revise as many times. You won't have to edit your work as much. You won't have a bunch of plot holes that you have to fix. And in this case, when you're talking about their mission, that first pillar, ask why. Why are they on this mission? That's going to be your main character's reason. It's their driving force is what I call that. That's the second pillar. So give them a driving force that makes sense, What do they want to achieve? That's their mission. why do they want to do it? That's their driving force. So this isn't something that you really have to throw out there in the beginning of your story. In fact, it's something that you will maybe want to just reveal piece by piece, slowly. And that's great. Those reveals are so helpful for drawing your reader in, making them just glued to that page. And, you know, if it's something that happened in your character's past, then of course you can reveal it by using a flashback. You know, I will warn, though, right now against the overuse of flashbacks because, hey, look, sometimes it's necessary, of course, but the first character that kind of comes to mind when it comes to flashbacks is it's the origin story of Batman, of Bruce Wayne. And, you know, if we're wanting to delve into the why, the driving force behind his mission to fight crime, essentially to end crime, right? So, of course, his driving force, the thing, that moment when his parents are killed, unless we're telling the story of his childhood, that has to be a flashback, right? So, of course, you can use that. But another good example of this that doesn't require a flashback for is Luke Skywalker. Of course, iconic character. And, you know, his original mission is to simply save the princess. And his driving force from the first film is also, coincidentally, the murder of his parents as well. And, you know, it was the Empire that did it. They immediately become his enemy. So that's the setup, and it works really well. And it all happens organically, like I said, because we know why he's doing it. And look, you know, the same thing goes for the other main characters. You look at Han Solo, and, you know, he ends up getting sucked into the very same mission as Luke and Obi-Wan. Now, his driving force is clearly very different than anyone else's, you know, and they talk about it at great length. It's the money, the reward, right? At least outwardly. And this is fun. This is another great element of characterization. Han Solo's conscious driving force. It's money and reward. But you can see as the character's developed more that his subconscious desire, it's a little bit deeper than that. And you know, there's a few things that I think his subconscious driving force is. Of course, you know, everyone may have a different opinion of this, but to me, when I look at his character, it's his driving force inside. What he really wants is to belong, you know, to be part of a family, to be admired, honestly, you know, for someone to love him, you know. And look, these human desires make him one of the most likable characters ever created. He uses this air, this kind of this bad boy air, and, you know, pretends for it to be all about the money because that's him, you know. And it creates a lot of depth. It makes you love Han, and he's my favorite character in that whole story, you know. So I could probably make a whole video on why I like Han Solo so much, but you get what I'm saying. Having a subconscious desire and a conscious desire, that motivation, that driving force, you know, it creates that extra depth, and it makes your characters even more likable. Another great example, of course, is Batman. His driving force, his conscious driving force is, you know, for him to fight crime, for him to end crime, technically. But, you know, on that subconscious level, he needs that crime. He needs that. He literally has to have something to fight against, for justice, for vengeance. And there's a complexity because those two things are at great odds with each other. It creates this huge tension inside of him. You love Bruce and Batman for who he is because of that. So those first two pillars, of course, you need to give your main character a mission, right? You need to ask why. That is their driving force. That's what motivates them to push forward toward that goal, you know? And hey, since we're talking comics specifically here, because that's what I'm writing right now, you want to give your character some special traits. And I know you're probably thinking, well, you know, superpowers, right? Well, it doesn't have to be that at all. Think about this, actually, from The Lord of the Rings again. What is Frodo's special trait? Well, it was his inherent goodness, right? And that's what makes him literally the only person for the job, or hobbit for the job in his case, of course, to get that ring to Mordor and destroy it. No one else could have done it. because of his goodness, he could resist the dark forces of that ring. Literally, the darkness inside of it that is inherent to that object itself. And look, all of this, part of his character arc there, it's embedded in the message, the theme of Frodo's character, that goodness is the path to destroying evil. And it really did a lot to help craft that theme of the story, So my writing video last week was all about themes, so I'm going to post that link below and maybe a link up top as well here. So, your character's special trait could be a special power. Like a superhero story, something like that. Superman has tons of special traits. But in this case, going back to Star Wars, of course, Luke's Force sensitivity. This was his ability to learn to control the Force. It becomes part of his character arc, too. He changes with that, and he has to overcome a bunch of obstacles. So, these kind of things, they really give your hero a larger-than-life feeling. They allow you to see your protagonist something that we wish that we were. If even simply metaphorically, So I was thinking about this the other day. I remember as a kid, pretending to be able to make things float like Luke Skywalker, levitating his lightsaber to his hand. And then, I'd play with my invisible lightsaber, making noises with my mouth and stuff. And, funny thing, later on in life, I went to study martial arts and learn how to use a real sword, a real katana. And so stories, they inspire real life. And sometimes that's a really good feeling for a writer, to be able to inspire people to do great things, overcome obstacles, and create wonderful achievements, Metaphor's powerful. It really is. And another reason that you just love Star Wars so much, So I went on a tangent, but look, all of that to say, there has to be something special, that special trait, something important about your protagonist. Otherwise, no one's going to care, honestly. They're not going to want to read about them, and on a deeper level, that special trait should really impact the story in some way, just like Frodo or Luke. And so we'll go on to the very fourth thing. So we talked about, giving your main character a mission. Ask why. That's that driving force. Give them a special trait. And so you almost want to ask why about that special trait as well. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's very, very helpful. And that's to develop your hero's past. Give them a history, and you want it to make sense. You want it to organically tie into the rest of their development points and their story arc. And I'll get to a lot of those things in later videos, but think about how important it is for all of these things to work together. The way we do that, again, and I know I'm harping on that at this point, but to ask why every single time. So in this case, why does your main character have these special characteristics? Whether they're unique abilities or what makes him the right person for the job, so to speak. And in Luke's case, his history was directly tied to his characteristics, which, of course, the Force, it runs in his family. It's passed down from generation to generation. And, of course, Darth Vader could use the Force. And now, all of those things, like I mentioned before, they're revealed slowly, piece by piece. And with each reveal, it pulls the reader in, or, in Star Wars case, the viewer. So here, in Star Wars, the mission is hinted at in the very beginning. Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi. You're my only hope. And as we continue, more details about their mission are revealed. And then, when Luke's family's killed by the Empire, that driving force, Luke's primary motivation is revealed. But here's a great thing about this story. During the whole course of the trilogy, and it takes a lot of time for those special characteristics to manifest, through lots of training, vigorous training. And like I said, that is powerful for Luke's character arc. Everything matters at that point, He had to work for what he has. He had to overcome obstacles. His powers, they weren't just there automatically, but they got better over time, over training. And here's the big kicker right here. Luke's history was revealed so slowly that it became a huge moment of shock and revelation for the viewer when they saw at the end of The Empire Strikes Back that Darth Vader was his father. I mean, boom, that was big. It was a huge reveal. So, if that was the end of a comic book, it would have been perfect as well. It was perfect at the end of Empire, and it would have been perfect for an issue of a comic book also. Because, when you write for a serial comic book format, at the end of every issue, you really want something big to happen, whether it's a big reveal, or an intro to the next story arc. A new villain comes in at the very last moment, and you're like, oh my god, that is what the next issue is going to be about. Or in the case of House of X #4, my favorite comic book in years, my favorite comic book that was written in years, it was a huge, big emotional kabam. I mean, it just hit you right in the face. And a lot of my friends that reviewed this comic book actually got emotional and maybe even cried a little bit. It was that powerful, So, look, when it comes to comics, you generally want, just like, and again, I'm going to make a video on this in the future, but you want 99% of the time, you want to begin with action as well. That very first page is where the comic is sold. But like I said, that's a video for another time. I go off on tangents all day and talk about this stuff till I'm blue in the face. So, hey, look, I hope you are enjoying my content. Again, I'm going to go over so much more when it comes to writing. It's my passion. If you're a writer, if you're simply a comic book reviewer as well, if you critique comic books, then I hope you got something out of this, because, critiquing these books, it's helpful to be able to look at stories and say why you liked it, So, again, there's no 100% right formula. Simply do what works for you, And I'll say this for the very end here. If you enjoy my content, hey, hit like and subscribe. I do my best to get as much content as possible, as busy as I am. In the next year, I'm actually going to be crowdfunding my own Indiegogo and Kickstarter. I'm going to put my project on both of those. It's going to be my first comic book. And, I've been writing short stories my whole life, but comics are my passion. Reading comics are my passion. And now writing comics, it's just my favorite thing, my very favorite thing to do. So, look, like I said, hit like and subscribe. And remember, you are the gateway into comics.